Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today and for joining me. Welcome to Backyard Birding from Your Balcony. And the reason why I have backyard in quotes is because technically I don't have a backyard. I'm shooting everything from my balcony. But that doesn't mean if you have a backyard, I'm so jealous because I live in Southern California in LA, and backyards can cost anywhere up to $1 million, and I'm still saving up for that. So a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Janet Long. I'm a national tech rep for Tamron, and usually we would be coming to you, presenting these talks in person. But however, that's not happening right now. But here is some of my social handles. I'll have it at the end as well. If there's any, again, I'll talk about how this whole birding journey is new. And if you are a bird enthusiast and you've been doing this for a while, if you have any tips, tricks for me, that'd be great. Let's see here. So an overview, how or why I got to photographing birds. I will talk about basically it started when we had to stay at home, and I found out all these birds around here, and it just became, a hobby while I'm stuck indoors. I'll also talk about the lenses used, equipment to consider, finding and waiting for birds. Finding meaning the research that I had to do to figure out what types of birds were native around my area, and then figuring out the type of feeders as well to buy for specific birds. Using a tree as my bird studio, I'll show you where most of the shots, a lot of the shots that I took are directly from this tree that's right next to my balcony railing I'm staring at right now. But I can literally just, hand touch it. So it's really close. And of course, looking at the bird images that I've been able to take so far throughout this whole time staying indoors. All right, so how I got into photographing birds. Just before we had to shelter in place, I started this new hobby, which was hand feeding hummingbirds. And I got into this because I just moved to this area where I am now, which is Palos Verdes, California. Before that, I was living in the city in North Hollywood where there weren't any birds. But before I moved here, I had followed this social media influencer where he was hand feeding hummingbirds. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to try this someday. And when I moved to this new area, I noticed hummingbirds, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can finally try this. So that's how I got into it, to hand feeding the hummingbirds. And then once I got to doing that, and then we had all this lockdown happen and quarantining, and I figured, well, why not I'm going to try and photograph these hummingbirds. So this is one of the first shots that I took while staying at home. And I don't know, this was like a lucky shot for me at the time. And I think this kind of sparked this whole birding journey for me. And I'll talk about the details as far as how I shot this. So it's just a quick intro to how I got to shooting these birds at home. I'm going to go over the lens designations really quick, just because later on when you see my images, on the bottom right, I will have the lens used. And I know a lot of people are unaware, or just, when you see the letters on the lenses, some are, have no idea what they mean. So here's a brief, quick overview. The DI on our lenses stands for they're made for full frame or APS-C. DI2 is specifically for crop sensor APS-C, and DI3 are for mirrorless. Lenses used. So the 18-400, I definitely shot quite a few images with the 18-400. Not only the range is one of our most popular lenses. And usually I'm not an all-in-one zoom lens person, but this one, I remember when it first came out and I tried it, it won me over. It does everything. You have your wide and your zoom, and also a telemacro if you zoom it at the all the way out, and you get as close as 17.7 inches away. So this is, we call our ultimate travel zoom. So for those of you, if you have this, I know it's a popular lens, and a lot of people I've spoken with, if they do have it, and that almost never leaves their camera. So I did try out the 35-150. So these are lenses I switched around just because this whole time of staying at home, I was just trying out different lenses. I was like, you know, why not? So the 35-150, even though it may not sound like a big range to do birding, like I said, the tree that I use as my bird studio is right next to me. So I figured I could try that out. The 70-10, I used this with a teleconverter actually, because I was shooting with the 150-600 quite a bit for my bird shots. And after a while, it got pretty heavy. And I was like, you know, why not I switch it out and try something else out. So I did this combo with the 70-10 and a 1.4 teleconverter. And then also a good alternative for the 150-600, also the 100-400, very light compared to the 150-600. And obviously I use the 150-600 quite a bit with all my birds. It's just, we call it our birdo lens, and it definitely is. And as far as the elements used in it and all the VC modes, the 3 VC modes, it's just, I mean, it's just a great lens to do wildlife and especially birding. And also, I just want to point out, we do have some great instant savings on especially on the 150-600, 150-600, which I think there is currently a $200 instant savings, as well as the 70-210. Okay, so equipment to consider. Like I just went over all the telephoto lenses. If you do have one, that would be great. If not, like if your birding area is close to you, you may not need a big zoom range. And a bird feeder, obviously we're trying to attract them. So I'll talk about how I researched and looked up the different types of birds are in my area to determine which type of feeder to buy as well. A tripod or a monopod. I don't have a monopod. I do have a tripod, and I set it up because like I said, the 150-600 got a little heavy at times, and I decided to try it on, to put it on a tripod, but then I guess I'm not used to using a tripod. Well, let me rephrase that. I usually don't use a tripod just because I'm more of a pick up and go, and I physically move myself to get into to get my image, or to frame, to do a composition. Is just easier for me. I've never really been a tripod user, but I'll show you the setup I did, and it may work for you. A teleconverter, like I said, if the 150-600 is too heavy for you, if you don't have that, you might consider getting a teleconverter if you already have a lens and you just need to extend your range. A comfy chair. So like I said, I just moved to this area and I haven't furnished my balcony yet. So most of the time I was sitting on this little step stool. So that, hours and hours of just sitting or standing on the step stool just got to me a little bit. So here's a quick look at my setup. So how you see me now is where I'm sitting at my desk right there. And as you can see, I have cameras ready to go. I almost always have a camera with the 150-600 ready to go, because as I'm working, sitting here at my desk, I can see all the bird activities on both my feeders. So that way I can just, grab my camera and take it. And usually the sliding doors, I do keep them open just because I think in the beginning when I had them closed and I would see some birds, and it would just give me that to open it slowly and not to scare them off. It just got in the way. So now I just leave them open. And so here's a quick look at the setup I said I tried with a tripod just to have it ready to go. But I felt like for me, it kind of hindered my ability to quickly take some shots. So I ditched it. I didn't even use it at all. So, but I will say that if you're familiar, one of our Tamron image masters, David Akubian, he's like our birder extraordinaire. He does use a monopod. He actually used specifically a Surrey monopod. So you might look into that if that's something you are interested in. All right, so here are the different types of feeders. It's like a quick overview. There's like many more, but these are some of the common ones. So I'm going to talk about the different ones and why I chose the one that I have. So There's, as you can see, there's a tube feeder, mainly for like house finches or smaller birds, and a soot feeder, and then a hopper feeder, which is, I guess, one of the popular ones because it's kind of like the one that looks like a house. And then a thistle feeder, or slash, it's also called Niger feeder because of the type of seed. It's really small. And those come in a mesh sock form or a metal mesh feeder, which is the one that I chose. And then a platform or slash tray feeder. So this is the one, after research and figuring out what types of birds are in my area, I went with a thistle feeder, or I don't know, in my mind, I think it's more of a hybrid between a tube feeder and a thistle feeder. So it's a metal mesh feeder. And the reason I went with this is because the main birds that are in my area are finches. They could be house finches and lesser goldfinches and two goldfinches. So I went with this one, and just because I looked at some reviews, it was really popular and it was cute looking, and plus yellow apparently attracts the goldfinches. And the type of seed I bought is Niger seeds. I know that the black oil sunflower seeds are normally the go-to, but I went with these just because, one, I read up that it will the bigger birds won't be attracted to all the, the sunflower seeds, that, they'll eat it all up or anything. And like I said, mainly I noticed in my area are just finches, house finches and lesser goldfinches. And so I just mainly wanted to attract them. So I went with the Niger seeds. And so this is a Niger feeder or thistle. So I put the feeder up for like, I think 4 or 5 days, and had no activity, no birds came. I was like, oh my gosh, I did all this research, finally picked out this feeder, and there were no birds for like 4 days. And even, picking the seeds because it's supposed to like not attract the bigger birds. And it was also supposed to help with squirrels. Like the squirrels usually aren't attracted to the smaller seeds as well, but that didn't keep them from being curious. So I was afraid that it was gonna get into my feeder, but it was a good thing that it's a metal mesh feeder. So I knew about the whole squirrels maybe getting into the seeds, but it was true that they didn't really care for the tiny seeds. So he went away, still no birds. Even my hummingbird thought it was a brand new feeder for him. He was curious. He kept hovering around it, thinking it was for him because of the bright colors, because hummingbirds are attracted to bright colors like yellows, oranges, pinks, and purples, but especially red. And then finally, I got my first bird. I was so excited. It was like after, like I said, I think it took 4 or 5 days to finally get a bird. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So I kept shooting. And then shortly after, I noticed another bird that came. And I was like so scared because I was afraid that the second bird would scare it away. But then, because kind of like I was just used to my hummingbirds where they chase each other away. But I don't know, after close observation, that I noticed that they were feeding each other. So again, keep in mind, before all this, I had no idea what, any bird habits, birding habits, what they do. And so with further research, I found out with finches or these types of birds, this is kind of a mating ritual that they will feed each other. And also, for the parents, if they're feeding their juveniles or fledglings and stuff as well. So I was finally excited. I was like, okay, finally I'm getting some birds. And so I put this images because I wanted to talk about why I went with this type of feeder. So if you remember the different types that I went over, like let's say if I went with a house feeder, the typical house feeder, it's kind of, the birds would just sit and kind of face the house, right? And it's even with a platform where they'll just sit in a normal sitting fashion. So I went with this mesh feeder because I knew that, the birds can just cling into any direction, and they can look out and arch their backs like this. So that way it'll give me like some sort of random visuals to shoot them that instead of just like them sitting at a feeder. So that's why I kind of premeditated. I knew that after looking at all the different feeders, I went with this one just because I know they can just sit and cling in different directions. I put this in because someone in some past classes, they asked about what I do about all the seeds that fall to the ground, and a lot of people think that mistaken that they're being wasted when they're actually not. So after a close inspection, I thought I was wasting all these seeds as well. But what's happening is that the birds are actually, they're eating it, and these are just the outside the husk. So they're splitting open the seeds and they're just discarding it. And yes, it does make a mess on my balcony, but it's an easy sweep. And also the bird poop, I know someone asked me that in a previous talk as well. What do I do about all the bird poop? And so far, I haven't had that bad of an issue with it because I'm on the 3rd floor of my complex. I know some past attendees were asking, they're worried about it falling to the neighbors below. Mine's actually sitting on my balcony. I don't have it hanging over past the rail. So I don't have so far I don't think I have any issues of it going down to my neighbors. All right, so now we're gonna take a closer look at the tree that I'm talking about. So if you see that tree directly in the top right with all those exposed branches, this is what it looks like. So here, the funny story about this is that when I first moved into this unit, the tree was actually really lush and full. And some of the branches actually went into my balcony. And then, traveling every weekend at the time, or one time I came back and I went out to my balcony and I noticed something just looked off. And I realized, oh my gosh, I chopped down my tree. And I remember thinking I was really disappointed, but that actually what caused all these birds to come more. So I started attracting all different types of birds, and because they like to perch. So it just started, I started noticing all these birds are coming, and even like some of the perches within the tree, there are birds all up and down. Fledglings use it to, wait for the parents and then more fledglings. Like I was just so shocked how many birds are just, flocking to this exposed tree now. All right, so back to the image of my first hummingbird image this is my first ever image. This was shot with the 15600 at, I believe, my shutter speed was 6/40th of a second, I believe. And I don't know, at the time I had no idea how to shoot birds or like what settings I should do. And I'm sure I had it I knew I should shoot it in shutter priority. I did that, and continuous high. If you have a multiple frames DSLR, I did set it to, for reference, I am shooting with a Nikon D750, D500, and I don't know if I shot any with a Sony, but Sony, I do have the Sony A7 III. Some quick hummingbird tips. They do, like I said, they do like the color red, and that's why you'll see a lot of the hummingbird feeders are of the color red. If not, they have some sort of red on them. Mine is actually copper with red flower ports, but a lot are red with, maybe yellow flower ports. Perch with them, and meaning I'll show an image later where basically, even with all the other birds, just to try to be in there as close as you can to immerse yourself in their environment, their habitat. And because, the more they see you around, the less they'll, be spooked, or, they'll be comfortable knowing you're there. Be patient, really patient. Gosh, I remember when we first started, sheltering at home, I would be out there hours and hours, sometimes all day, sitting on my little step stool, and just waiting, and just, it's been kind of cool. It's been definitely and occupied my time all this time indoors, or technically outdoors. Know your bird. So I'll talk about this more in a few slides where I found out there's different types of hummingbirds. So, but this could also apply to other birds as well. If you know, especially with the hummingbirds, because they are so fast, there's different sizes of hummingbirds, small ones to larger hummingbirds, and their wing flap rate can vary. So, you know, whether it's faster or slower, that can also help you determine your shutter speed. And shoot fast and continuous. I'll talk about how in the beginning I kind of just spray and prayed, and I think that's how I got this image. It was just lucky shot, and I shoot continuous, and I tried all the different types of focus methods, and I still went back to single point, and I'll go into further detail on those. So this is how I got that hummingbird shot. I used the 15600 on my balcony, and I know that may sound counterintuitive, because when you think about the 15600, you're thinking about you're going on a safari or you're shooting wildlife in some vast area. But I knew that the lens can do telemacro. If you zoom in all the way out, you can get as close as 86.6 inches away. So that's a little over 7 feet. So since it was my first time shooting a hummingbird, you know, obviously I didn't want to get too close to it. But I wanted to get as close enough just because they're so tiny to get a decent image. So I set my step stool right there on, so I had to stand on it just because, I don't know if you can tell, but in the top right is actually my hummingbird feeder hanging. And I just wanted to kind of be on the same level to get the hummingbird. So I started out, you know, this feeder that I got, I purposely wanted the one that had like these little branch-like little places for them to sit. And, you know, which is a great thing to look into if you're starting out, because this definitely helped me just to get comfortable with shooting these tiny little hummingbirds, is to catch them when they're sitting. So this is one of the first images that I caught, I took when it was sitting. And then to get the other image, after, gosh, a lot of observing their habits, what I noticed, like after they feed, they'll hover in the air for like a few seconds. So now I know, like knowing their habits of how they feed, I know that can be that's my window of opportunity to shoot them midair. So that's how I got that other image. But the other image was kind of by chance, but I retook another one using the same method. So I'm going to go through some images. Like these are in the beginning, so how they're kind of all over the place. And this was actually taken through the sliding glass door, because my desk used to be on the other side. And again, I had my camera on the floor ready to go. And I happened to I was shocked to see a hummingbird out in the rain, which is one of the few days that it rains here in LA. And so I shot this straight through my sliding glass door with the 15600. And I was so shocked that I was able to capture it through the glass. And so here is the quick overview of what I mentioned before about the wings flapping anywhere from 12 to 200 per second, and then the different types of hummingbirds, and whether they're smaller or bigger, that their wing rate can help you determine your shutter speed. And with this one, like I said, I think I shot this at 6/40th of a second. Auto ISO. Some of the settings that I've used, that I've adopted it from, is from our Tamron image master, David Agubian. I learned from him that he shoots auto ISO. And the reason for that is because when you're shooting throughout the day, you know, the sun, it changes, the clouds can come in and out. And so he just puts it on auto ISO. And I feel like that helped me as well. So that definitely was a setting to do. I shot mostly in shutter priority. And because like I said, I started out shooting the hummingbirds. Later on, I was, with the other birds, I shot shutter priority as well, but not as fast. And as far as aperture, I know, let's see, again, I was consulting with David a lot. A lot of them he shot in aperture f8. because that way, for the most part, you can get most of moving subjects around that range. So I tried out the focus limiter when I shot this image, and I've never used a focus limiter. So if you don't know what the focus limiter does, on the 150-600, it has it. So since the lens is such a big range, and knowing that I was standing within a little over 7 feet away from the feeder, I knew that my shooting range is like the closest distance of that lens. So when I first noticed, when I lose my focus point and the lens would focus way out back in the trees in the back, then I was like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot that this lens has a focus limiter. So I set it to the closest range. So as you can see, there's three settings. The full, meaning obviously the lens will focus through the whole range of it. Then you have the closest part of it. Then you have from the mid part to the distance part. So obviously I set it to the closest range, and that definitely cut down the time and helped with the autofocus so much quicker, because that way it didn't have to hunt the whole range of it. All right, so this image is the second image, or actually the first image of a non-hummingbird, and that's how this whole birding kind of started for me. This, again, I feel like was a lucky shot. Again, this was when my desk was on the other side, and I shot through my sliding glass door again. So I saw this bird land, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this bird around, and I had no idea what kind of bird it was. I just shot it, and I believe it was just incredible. I think it's one of my favorite images of all the images I've taken. There's another one of a young fledgling where I'll talk about later, but this was the first image that sparked this whole other birds and other than the hummingbirds to shoot. All right, so before I go into any further, I'm going to go into talking how I started the research to figuring out what types of birds are in the area, which I did the long way. I literally Googled, like for instance, this bird, I literally Googled bird with gray and patches of red in Los Angeles. And so I found out it's a house finch. And then, I did that literally with every bird I saw, not knowing that this whole time there was an app for birds. And so I'm telling you this now because I did it the long way. If you already know about this site, it's awesome. If you don't, still awesome. So it's by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And this is their site. It has so much information on it. And if you download the app for Apple phones or Android, it is actually called the Merlin Bird ID, I believe. Yeah, Merlin Bird ID. So what this does, oh my gosh, it will tell you if you're trying to figure out what kind of birds, or if you don't know what kind of birds are in your area. If you do see a bird, you can snap a picture and it will, look it up for you. Or you can, if you put in your location, it will tell you to this day, like even today, like if I were to look it up, it'll like give me a list of what types of birds I might see in this area. So I wish I knew all this, because it would have cut down all the time of me researching and Googling every bird that I saw. But it's a great app. It even has sound calls, because I noticed there's a lot of different calls and sounds, and it helps to know what they are. And I would just listen to the different sounds. That way I know if I hear it, I know what type of bird's out there. All right, so I'm going to go through, these are like the images in the beginning when I was just seeing what types of birds are in the area. So this was just a raven, and at first I wasn't sure if it was a raven or a crow, and because there's so many of these around, and these were the first birds I noticed in this area. And then it dawned on me one day, I was like, it has to be a raven, because my street is actually named Raven Spur. so there's all these ravens. They are so hard to photograph because they're so dark. And I happened to see him. He was perched on this really tall pine tree soaring into the sky. And like I said, this was in the beginning, trying to figure out what birds are in the area. I'm just trying to capture all the birds so I can identify them and Google them the long way. And it was so hard to shoot. I kind of gave up on shooting the ravens because, like I said, they're so dark. But I did happen to come across this, and I shot it. I was like, oh my gosh, it kind of reminds me of the Birds movie, The Birds, which is one of my favorite movies. So rather than calling this image a wash, I actually took the image into Lightroom and I bumped up the whites for the background a little bit, just because it was another gray, rare gray day here in LA. And I didn't want to bump it up too white, just because I still want to keep it the dreary, eerie look of the birds. So I don't know. It's weird how I felt like I kind of gave up on shooting the ravens, and this kind of is one of my favorite images as well. All right, again, going through just, these are just, you know, not any particular awesome photos or anything. These are just in the beginning, trying to figure out spotting the birds and then trying to identify them. So this is one of the images, figuring out what types of birds these were at the time. Again, this is a house finch, more house finches feeding their juveniles, which was awesome. And this, again, I saw this in the tree and I took it and I looked, Googled it and like, okay, yellowbird with black patches, and found out it's a goldfinch, or a lesser goldfinch too. And then I saw this bird, again, Googling, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I've never seen a bird with just a black head. And again, I did the long way, I Googled it and found out it's a dark-eyed junco. So yeah, I can't believe I literally did everything the long way. But there's this app now, but now I can listen to the app and listen to the different calls and figure out what birds they are now. And then I started noticing fledglings. I was like, oh my gosh, is it that time? This was like a couple months ago. I think like late spring, I believe. And I was so happy. I was like, oh my gosh, I can maybe shoot some like babies or like fledglings and little young ones. So I spotted this on my tree that's right next to my balcony, and then more juveniles. And so I learned how to, you know, figure out if they're juveniles, because as you can see, some of the plumage here, the fur, because when they're younger, they're like extra fluffy. And then you can see some of their, you know, their wings are being more defined as they mature. So this one was one of the first juveniles that landed on my tree. And I remember being so excited. I kept shooting because it sat there for a while. It didn't mind me taking pictures. I mean, it kept to the point where he was just like, are you done yet? And at this time, like I said, it was early in the stage of, you know, me figuring out the birds, and I wasn't really too worried about my settings yet. And after, like, you know, as you can see, I think at some point I'll try and remind myself to point out where my settings kind of became more consistent and more efficient for me to shoot. And then again, more finches. So all I feel like all I have are finches around here. I wish I had more of a, like the more colorful ones, like I see some of my coworkers or friends on the East Coast have, like the bluebirds and the cardinals and the blue jays. But for now, I have these lesser goldfinches. So these two, I call these two Romeo and Juliet, these two, because the reason is because at the time, like I said, after a lot of observation and listening to their calls, I heard him, they're both in the same tree, well, the one tree that I have really. And he was up top making this really dominant call. And then shortly after he makes the call, I hear like a second little light chirps, little repeated chirps within the tree. So I kept trying to look for, I guess her, I'm assuming. And it was kind of hard. As you can see, she kind of blends in with the leaves. And then finally I found her, so I kept shooting. So it was kind of cute because, like I said, he kept making this dominant call, and then she'll follow with the chirps afterwards. So now when I hear kind of that same combo of calls, I know there's gonna be two birds in the tree. And so that's kind of, you know, as I observe more and listen more to these bird calls, I can pretty much tell what they're about to do, because now I can even not identify, but there are certain calls I know where when I hear it, I know one of them will be at my feeder soon. and sure enough, every time. So it's a lot of observation. Let's see here. So this is, okay. This is my little hummingbird dude, and he's been with me since day one, and he's such a bully. He just, oh my gosh, because tiny, hummingbirds are just known to be very territorial. I didn't know that at first, and I remember, when I would see hummingbirds, they come and like, they would like chase each other away. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like, why are they doing that? I want them to come to my feeder. He just keeps chasing them away. So this is one of the few times I can catch him in the tree, like, because he's so tiny. It's really tiny. So he's deep in the tree, and usually this tree has like, I don't know how to describe it, but like these little branches, as you can see, they're always in the way, right? Like they're always either intersecting him or in front of him. And this is one of the few times where it's like clear. So I was just so happy when I caught him perch. Because another tip is, even with the other birds too, I noticed. So the hummingbirds, what they'll do, they'll feed, and then after they're done feeding at the feeder, they'll usually fly to the nearest tree or their favorite spot to perch. And what they'll do is they'll clean off their beaks I'm assuming that's what they're doing, because I see them brushing their beaks onto either the leaves or the branches to clean it off, I guess, after feeding. So, and I noticed that with the finches as well. After they feed at my feeder, they'll fly to the nearest tree and clean off their beaks. So sorry if it's getting loud, I guess there's the dump truck just rolled through. So the finches and the hummingbirds, they will fly to their favorite perch spot, like I said, to clean off their beaks. And where was I going? Oh, so if you're getting bored of shooting them at the feeders, which after a while I did, and I want to shoot them in like the trees and stuff, that's a good thing. What I'll do now is I will wait till they feed at the feeder and then follow them into the tree when they're sitting. That's when a good chance to catch them like this. And this was another time where I caught him, away from the feeder. Sometimes what he'll do, I know he has some favorite spots as guarding posts. So he'll just sit and just guard his feeder all day, and he'll chase away all the other hummingbirds. And again, this is him at one of his favorite spots, and he was scratching himself. And I thought it was the cutest thing, because I like how his beak, the way he's leaning, is the same direction as that branch. Okay, so this was another attempt at my hummingbird in midair. So if you remember, the first image was a lucky shot, right? So now this is about the halfway, part where my images are getting more, I guess, in my mind, more consistent, and I'm shooting more efficiently because I set my camera auto ISO and I shoot it in shutter priority. And I tried the different, autofocus methods, like, 3D tracking or, just continuous and everything. But I still went back to single point. Only because, like I said, after a lot of observation and knowing their habits, how they feed, I kind of can anticipate their next move. So I'm pretty, I use the single point now. And also I forgot to mention this, but I switched over to using center weighted metering instead of matrix, because the images in the beginning were all matrix. I kind of put all that, generalized, but also I learned from, again, our Tamron image master, David Akubian. He shot all in spot metering, and I don't know, I think I tried both. I tried spot and center weighted, and I felt like the center weighted worked for me better. So the second half of my images were all center weighted metering, and I feel like the exposure overall for me was consistent. So this was just taken like last week, actually. It was the first time I noticed a finch waiting, clinging to the side of my building, waiting for the feeder. So I also learned that the finches, they kind of have this cute social etiquette where they'll wait in line if the feeder is busy and they don't have room to get in there, they'll wait. And so knowing this, I plan to, I guess, put like little fake branches up near the feeder or maybe clamp them to my rail. So to create like a little mini studio, I guess you could say, near the feeder with, little branches exposed so that as they're waiting, I can capture some images. So that's an idea. So yeah, so when I saw this bird waiting in line, I was like, oh my gosh, definitely I'm like gonna put some different branches now to make a little mini bird studio by the feeder. And then this image was, again, was that same day as this one, waiting. So I think she was waiting for him. When this is another rainy day, if that's all that drizzle right there. This is also the first time that one of the finches, after feeding, that they just hopped onto the rail. But I guess it's because it's raining and they're like, trying to find a moment to get to their favorite perch spot. Because usually, like I said, they'll go to the nearest tree to clean off their beaks. And as you can see, it's pretty dirty. He just had a big meal there. And then finally, oh my gosh, I was so happy to finally spot a fledgling that's full and fluffy. And how I found it is because, again, I listen to calls now. So I heard like a constant little, really like light chirps, like repeated chirps within the tree. So I went out to the tree and was just searching within it, like, gosh, where is this young fledgling? And for the longest time, I couldn't find that. I finally found it, and I was just like so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I can finally shoot this fledgling. So I kept shooting away and like constantly. I ran back in and I opened my camera and I had no memory card. I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe it. And then I calmed down and I was just like, you know what? I didn't have the lens I wanted anyways. So I switched out my lens, and with this one, I did the 72-10 with the teleconverter, only because like I knew that my distance to the bird, it was within the trees. So, and it was a really bright day, super bright. I was like, I didn't have confidence using the teleconverter because you do lose a stoplight using that. And then finally got some images. I mean, I kept going crazy on this fledgling. And this is my favorite image of it, just because right when I was shooting, I tilted his head and it caught that light in its eye, so it's perfect. And another reason why I switched to the 72-10 with the teleconverter is because I actually had to lean over the railing, and if I had done it with the 150-600, it just would have been so heavy. There was no way I could have done that. So I kept continuing shooting it because it finally got its way up to the top of the tree. And I felt like it was fluffing up itself, getting ready for me, getting situated. And it finally got into position, and I was just like, oh, that's my favorite. So I believe that's my final image. Yes. So far that's the image. Those are the images I've taken throughout these few months of being indoors. Again, all from my balcony. I did not venture out. They're all from that, either my feeder or, the hummingbirds hovering in midair, and then from that tree. Any tips or, tricks that you have if you're a bird enthusiast yourself, definitely hit me up on these socials, or we can chat about it right now.
Wonderful. We did have a question, actually a couple folks talking about the ravens. He had some pictures of ravens and crows. Somebody was trying to get some photos of crows, but because they're so dark, wondering if you had like any tips as far as what, how you overcame that, how you were able to get the detail on the birds.
Well, like I said, so far, I haven't really found any way around shooting them so dark, because I think after that I kind of gave up. I mean, after this image, this was the only way I could come up with, shooting it in a creative way. I was like, I'm just going to give up on trying to get the details and just shoot their silhouettes. And that's how I came up with this. And I was like, oh my gosh, totally reminds me of The Birds, the movie, and which is awesome. But I think after that, I kind of focused on the finches just because I think around that time they were starting to mate and breed, and a lot of the fledglings were coming out. And so I just kept focusing on those.
Okay.
But the ravens are always soaring around here, and I haven't been able to capture them from my balcony, because they're always soaring and, doing all these acrobatic things.
Yeah. They're not, so you're saying they're not the same as hummingbirds?
No, because they're way bigger. And what they'll do is they'll dive, and they're always like up high and they're far. So from where I'm at, I think maybe I'm at a disadvantage maybe or something. Whereas, and I haven't tried to attract them because I know ravens are really smart birds. And I think once I put stuff out for them to eat, they're going to probably the whole family will come. So, and they're big, gigantic birds. So I don't want them to come yet. I'm not ready.
Another question here to talk a little bit, again, I know you covered it a little bit in the presentation there, but on kind of your focusing methods.
Oh yeah.
How you focus, maybe, and the difference between focusing on, hummingbird, which we all know is a really fast, fidgety kind of bird, and then something larger like a crow or raven, what the difference would be between the two of them, if there is one.
Right. So yes, like I mentioned, I went through the different focusing methods, where like the 3D tracking, I tried the 3D tracking on the hummingbirds, which actually it does help, especially when in the beginning when I wasn't I didn't know their habits or anything, and it did a pretty good job as they're hovering around the feeder. But like I said, I think what helped a lot is just knowing, after a lot of observation, knowing their habits and how they feed and what they do while they're feeding. And so I can anticipate their next move. So I did switch back to single point. I don't know, I'm used to shooting single point, and it's kind of like, I think of anything, like any sports or activity, like I used to shoot salsa competitions, and I danced salsa, so I knew to anticipate their next move. So it's kind of the same where, as I'm observing these birds and how they feed, I kind of anticipate what they're going to do next, and kind of know, with the single point, I was able to shoot it. But I guess, let's see, the 3D tracking or like the continuous modes, they work fine. I don't know why I went back to the single reel. I think it's just habit, or I'm used to that.
Cool. And then another question here to cover the difference, at least in your experience, the difference between using the teleconverter, as you'd mentioned, you were the teleconverters earlier, versus just using a longer lens. And then more specifically, you'd mentioned the loss of one stop versus image quality loss.
Let's see here. I'm trying to look for, so yeah, so in my case, like this one, like I said, two things. So like, we've been indoors for a while, so I just kind of wanted to try different combinations. So since I rarely ever used a teleconverter, I wanted to try that out. And I knew that this was a super bright day. And I knew that, when you use a teleconverter, you do lose a stop of light. And there was always, they always say that it's preferred if you use a fast lens, like 2.8 or faster, because of that stop of light. But since I knew this day was super bright, I was fine. I was okay using the 7210, which is an f4. And for those of you that are not aware or never use a teleconverter, we have a 1.4 and a 2.0 times. So meaning whatever lens range you have, you just multiply that either by 1.4 or double that. And as far as quality, I was happy like this one with the 7210. And also if I didn't use the teleconverter, what I'll do is sometimes with the D500 and a full frame lens, I'll get, that extra reach as well. But as far as loss of quality, I didn't notice that much. What I will say is that when I do use a 150-600, when I switch back, let's say I switch between lenses and I shoot with the 150-600 again, I don't know, it's just the colors in it. It's just that pop because it's, you know, a G2 lens and the extra, the elements that are using it, the extra coatings. I know, it's just like that, like it's just a better, that pop. I don't know, the color. And also the VC modes in that. I handhold all these images, I handheld all these images, and the VC and the 150-600 is just amazing.
Nice. Well, I think that's, any last questions, anybody? If you got them, throw them in the chat room for us. I know we've gotten a couple compliments for you on how inspiring your work and your presentation is. So you can definitely take those.
And for those of you, I don't know, I guess the Bird app, again, it's the Merlin Bird ID from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which I wish I knew that ahead of time.
There's actually somebody right before you got to this slide earlier, somebody in the chat section shared this as a good resource.
Oh yeah.
And then you got to this slide and like, hey, there it is.
Yeah. No, it's a really cool app.
Cool.
Well,
it looks like that is everything for questions. Anybody that has any further questions, unless Jen, did you get any on your end?
No, I mean, I got a little bit of chat going on, but it's mostly questions about the store. So.
Oh, okay. Also very good.
Yeah.
So yeah, going forward, you guys saw Janet's social media handles on there. So if you have any other questions, you can follow Janet there, and you can direct any questions to Janet. And then any questions about the store or further questions about Tamron products, like Janet said, most of the lenses she used to do all of those amazing shots of the hummingbirds and just the birds in general all have like pretty extensive rebates going on them right now. So all that information they would have at Looking Glass, and then information obviously about Looking Glass or any other products can be directed to them. They are open. You cannot go inside, but you can still stop by and see them. But maybe call first. Always a good idea, a good measure. And then without further ado, I guess we'll just call it at that. Definitely stay tuned to Jen and Looking Glass for more Tamron webinars we have coming up this month. But it looks like Jen has something that she wants to say.
Oh, I was just going to say one other thing. I mean, obviously, if you have any questions about photography, we are happy to help you with any of those. And particularly this type of photography, I tend to start my mornings with a cup of coffee and a long lens, just sitting out and photographing the birds in my yard too. So I've been doing this quite a bit for a while and working my way through it very similarly to Janet. The Wild Birds Unlimited, I'm just going to point out really quickly, like there's this store called Wild Birds Unlimited, which is an amazing resource, and also your local Audubon societies if you're looking for a lot of good information to know more about the birds, particularly in your area. That app was awesome. I'm excited. I downloaded it while we were on this. So thank you for that. But I also just want to thank our customers and Tamron, as I always do, for doing an awesome job and being here. And if you get a chance to spend some time looking at what it is that's happening in your yard, the world is changing a lot right now. And so the birds are changing, the insects are changing, and capture it while you can.
Yeah, I had no idea I had all these birds because, like I said, I'm usually gone every weekend when we used to travel, and I was like, now I'm like, oh wow, now I have like free pets.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
There was one last question just saw come through. Any tips for capturing newborns? You had some images in the Janet of the I forget what you called them, the juveniles.
Fledglings.
Yeah, and then or hummingbirds in a nest if you've encountered
Oh,
that yet.
I haven't, but I don't know if you know our Cameron Tech rep Erica. She encountered hummingbirds in a nest. So they are very fragile. So, and I feel bad that I didn't warn her because her babies got eaten. Um, so yes, don't try not to get, if you see them, don't get too close yet. I know it's very tempting to want to get up close. You want to take a look and try to get some shots. But from what I heard so far, I'm still looking into it. But I think something about us, if we get too close to it, you might scare the mother or something and then it won't come back. And then it leaves them, exposed to predators. So I think that might have happened with Erica's situation. I feel so terrible. I didn't warn her, and because I heard a story from someone else about it, and I was trying to get the specifics of how you're supposed to deal with it, and I didn't get back to her in time. And then she texted me a few days later. She's like, "Janet, the hummingbirds got eaten."
Oh.
So yes, I don't know specifically how you're supposed to deal with those or how to capture them. If you have definitely a really long lens and you have the visibility, then do it from afar, but don't get too close to it for sure. Yeah, not that's my advice, just because I haven't encountered hummingbirds in a nest yet, but from what I've heard so far, they can easily be eaten by predators. Yeah. But as far as the fledglings with the finches, they're I've had no issues. They're pretty they usually, I at first I thought they would fly away easily, but they don't. They just sit where they find a safe spot and they kind of just wait for the parents to come back with the food. And that's how I captured my fledglings on the on their branches.
Cool. Okay. That was says thanks. I had a gut feeling about that, so I was staying away. She flutters around a lot,
Oh.
and makes noise. So you don't want to get too close. Makes sense. Good idea. Good call. Great. All right. Well, yeah. So thanks everybody. Thank you, Janet. Thanks, Jen. And we will look forward to seeing everybody again next week for another Tamron webinar with Looking Glass.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Goodbye.
guys. Have a
Take
great
care,
day.
guys. Everybody stay safe.